Hi, this is Michael Bigham. I wanted to discuss with you guys today. I know in my previous video I let you guys know that I would make an extra video within 5 minutes, but I had some complications and I needed to address those matters that became important to me. So, I wanted to talk to you guys today about the transmitters in the brain. I wanted you guys to kind of understand how the transmitters work, what the purposes are for the transmitters in the brain, and how by giving chemicals like lithium and different prescribed medications to suppress these transmitters, you really don't cause the brain to work correctly. I wanted to discuss with you guys my experiences being on the wrong medication and being misdiagnosed. I know my previous video is not getting very many views, so I will try to title this video in such a way that would probably get more interest. But at this point, I want to go ahead and discuss with you guys the side effects of drug suppression when it comes to mental health, psychotropics, and depressants. So here we go. The way I would explain what has happened to me is to describe the comparison between the brain and a fuse in a television. When you change how the neurotransmitters function in the brain, by controlling how much power these fuses can produce, you cause the fuses not to work properly. The chemicals cause the fuses to confuse the regulatory process, and the fuses cannot keep you conscious. By changing these levels and slowing them down or speeding them up with chemicals, as a human ideology and thinking there's a human defect, the human has decided that this defect is in the emotional response that the transmitters give off. They assume that it is related to the transmitters in the brain alone. But in actuality, the fuses in the brain are designed to respond emotionally to information coming from the environment. Not a dysfunctional cause of genetic defect, but caused by human error. By the control of the sensory control of the transmitters. But this ideology in the problem does not relate primarily first by cause of response in dysfunctional brain function, as if the brain is experiencing an issue that it cannot resolve on its own. The way the brain is designed, it naturally heals itself by the individual's outside environment changing. The way the brain is designed, it naturally heals itself by the individual's outside environment changing. I'm sorry, I read that already. This change takes time. It cannot be forced. The fuses change their regulatory and sensory functioning by information coming in from their environment. But how the transmitters respond to environmental changes are solely dependent on how others respond. In the same way iron sharpens iron, so people shape people. We build or tear down each other's beliefs of who they acknowledge they are. What their intentions are have become a comparison of their actions. By this, we assume that their motives will remain intact by their initial choice of action. This ideology does not mean that we should believe that we change others' choices of action by doing much of the same thing that has been done to us. In some way, we think that by acting in anger or seeking revenge, that others would stop and think about their own response, and in some way make a choice to respond differently towards us. This course of action only makes the situation worse and never changes their mind or yours with how either of us respond. But when we choose to respond differently and choose to forgive rather than respond the same, we do change others' minds of us because the response is different. This shows others we are understanding how our response has caused them pain, and that we are now choosing to change it. It lets them know that we acknowledge we were wrong. This calms the anger and changes their mind about wanting to seek revenge. This is where we all have a personal responsibility to each other. No matter what someone has done to anyone, when we choose to not take responsibility for ourselves, we are refusing to take responsibility of others' choices. In some way, our actions or responses become others. But when we give someone drugs, you cause confusion for the brain to do its job in naturally responding to changes in environmental intake of information. These chemicals give off a repetitive control of the emotional response by unnaturally suppressing the transmitters and preventing change of the response. This is where the brain takes no action to change the behavior because it's under control. So how can you expect the person's choice of action to display positive control of their response? This control is never positive by making the response repetitive. The responses are the same as a broken record. They only repeat when controlled. This change remains a negative response and never changes. It does not help either when the effect of confusion the drugs cause can prevent in the natural cycle of changing it through knowing and understanding knowledge learned. This becomes evident in how one cannot acknowledge their responses by not having a natural motivation to change it. By allowing this, you force an alteration in how they respond. The idea was that the transmitters may have been the cause of emotional responses, making this ideology a human defect, but yet not caused by others, but by a disability, or a disability in proper brain function. Okay, give me a second. This focus causes the issue presented to overshadow the underlying cause by creating an alternate focus of who should be responsible. This stigma somehow has been an individual's personal responsibility. The responsibility of this is somehow instilled in the individual's need to take, not necessarily the cause of their environment, but mainly caused by personal defect. This idea that something is wrong with the brain in this case is way off base. The behavior is more related to how the individual has learned to respond by the responses being taught in how other people respond. By causing suppression of these fuses, the brain is obviously not correctly functioning. Because if the transmitters become suppressed, the consciousness of the mind becomes suppressed and altered. Basically, your judgment is affected. When the person has taken these drugs for many years, you've trained the mind to be dependent on an alteration in how the mind keeps a person conscious. This idea is what you would call withdrawing from a dependent change in cognitive or conscious awareness, or an altered state of homeostasis to heterostasis. You cause these transmitters to wear out over time when the brain no longer receives this intake of the medication to keep this alteration consistent. This is the same ideology in a 1080p TV. The TV is designed to protect itself if this happens by shutting off power to the device. The brain works the same way. You will find that if you try to turn the TV back on, it will turn back off. It shuts off automatically by itself so the screen does not overheat and burn out. In the brain, there is an automatic power switch that keeps the person conscious, not controlled by an individual, but by the fuses, transmitters. This is different with a man-made device. We simply don't know where the regulatory change takes place in the brain. It takes a human to physically turn the power back on and replace the fuse or fuses. But with the brain, this is not possible. You just need to keep depending on the drugs, they say. But with the brain, this alteration with chemicals has forced the conscious mind into a state of confusion. The fuses don't know if they should turn off or on. This is evident in being able to get to sleep naturally or remain awake and responsive. The ability for the fuses to regulate this change in conscious states is dependent on energy level distribution, in which the fuses allow the mind to be aware and conscious. This is also what allows the brain to focus and change focus. This is evident in becoming tired or not. In this case, the fuses become confused in how to keep the person conscious and confused in how to respond with positive emotion. They become stuck in a repetitive negative emotional response because of a chemical control. Do they depend on the addiction of the chemical, or do the fuses naturally take control and the ability to regulate consciousness, or the emotional response? The fuses control all of these natural abilities, but to force a chemical control, you alter the ability to change the cognitive response by suppressing the ability to choose an alternate response. So when you cause confusion, you confuse the transmitters. Do they work properly? No. It is the same with the brain as the TV. In the brain, this action the chemicals take can be related to the loss of consciousness because of this confused state. I believe that these transmitters, fuses, are why the brain keeps consciousness alive in the individual. So, I just wanted to let you guys know that that's my own personal experience on these psychotropic medications that I had been previously prescribed and on for a number of years. I experienced confusion to the point where all those things are affected. Now, in a minute, I'm going to get into the neurotransmitters, fuses, control multiple regulatory functions. I'm going to give that understanding on my next video. I hope you guys get a chance to watch my video and find out for yourselves that psychologists and doctors do not know what they're talking about. Saying all these medications are a benefit to you and the people around them. But what they don't understand is that it affects your identity, it affects your judgment, it affects your character. And I know on my previous video I described to you guys a couple other things that it does affect. But I'm going to go ahead and get into the next video as soon as I get off here. Hopefully I won't get distracted with something else. This is Michael James Bigham. You all have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.